While I stood beside my wife's casket, my son was outside shaking hands with a real estate agent. I didn't know it then, I was too busy holding back tears, staring at the photo of Marjorie smiling in her garden, the same one she'd planted with love 50 years ago. The next morning, a man knocked on my door with papers in hand. "Your son said you'd be out by the end of the week," he said. I blinked at him, heart pounding. My wife wasn't even buried yet, and my son had already sold our home. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. I was 24 when Marjorie and I bought that patch of land. Back then, it was nothing but weeds, rock, and promise. We had no money to hire builders, so I learned by doing, laid the foundation myself, hammered every beam, painted every wall. Marjorie picked out the colors and the curtains. I did the rest. It took us 3 years to finish, and by the time we moved in, she was already pregnant with Darren. We weren't rich. I worked maintenance at the city school, fixed boilers and broken desks for 30 years. Marjorie worked nights as a nurse until Darren was born. After that, she stayed home, said it was more important to raise him right than to chase money. And raise him right, she did. She read to him, walked him to school, taught him manners and how to say thank you with his eyes. I remember his little hand wrapped around mine the first day I walked him to kindergarten. He looked up at me and said, "I'm gonna build houses like you, Dad." I nearly cried right there in front of the school. We didn't go on big vacations or buy new cars. But every Sunday, Marjorie made roast chicken with rosemary from her garden. We played cards after dinner, or Darren and I would work on little projects in the garage. When he was 12, we built a treehouse together in the backyard. He told me he'd live in it forever. For a while, we were everything to each other. That boy used to draw pictures of our house at school, always with a little heart over the roof. One time, his teacher sent home a note that said, "Darren speaks very proudly of his parents. You've clearly built a strong foundation." I hung that note on the fridge for years. Marjorie used to say our house had a soul. I think she was right. It soaked up our laughter, our fights, our tears. When she fell ill, she said she wanted to die in that house, with the windows open and the smell of my lilacs in the breeze. I promised her she would. Darren changed when he left for college. He came back quieter, harder. Less interested in our stories. He'd look at the living room and call it dated. He called our car embarrassing once, in front of his girlfriend. I laughed it off, but Marjorie's eyes dimmed that night. We tried to understand. It's natural, we told ourselves, kids grow up, want more. Still, it stung. He started asking strange questions after she got sick. About the house deed. About liquidating assets, in case she needed care. I thought he was trying to help. I even let him handle some bills when Marjorie was too tired to read. He said, "It's just easier if I take care of the paperwork, Dad." We trusted him. Even when he stopped coming over unless it was to check on things, we made excuses. He was busy. He had a new job, a new woman, Leah. She never looked me in the eye. Always on her phone, correcting him in front of us. One time she said, "You should really convince your dad to downsize. It's irresponsible to hang on to all this space." I said nothing. Marjorie squeezed my hand under the table. Even as her illness advanced, we tried to keep the house alive, the curtains clean, the garden blooming. I wheeled her to the porch every morning so she could sip her tea and watch the birds. She never once said she was afraid to die. Only that she was afraid to leave the house behind. "It's where we raised him," she'd whisper. "It's where I still see him, small again." I didn't know what to do with that. The week before she passed, Darren came by briefly, stood in the doorway like he was in a hotel lobby. Marjorie asked him to sit with her, just for a few minutes. He said he had a work call, kissed her on the forehead like she was already gone, and left. She cried that night, quietly, so I wouldn't notice. But I did. Still, I held out hope. I thought maybe after the funeral, he'd stay. Maybe he'd remember what this place meant. Maybe we'd sit on the porch together, just once more. But instead, he sold it. I replay those good years now like old tapes, grainy, warm, fragile. The sound of Darren's laughter in the backyard, Marjorie's humming in the kitchen, my boots scraping the porch steps after work. That house held us. It wasn't just wood and tile and paint. It was our legacy. And Darren, our boy, our only child, he tossed it like trash on the sidewalk. Sold it behind my back while I was still burying her. Sometimes, I wonder if he remembers that note on the fridge. The one that said we built a strong foundation. Because now, it's all starting to crack. It's strange how you can live through something and not realize what's happening until it's already done. The signs were there. Looking back now, I can see every crack, every cold glance, every swallowed insult. But when you love someone, especially your child, you convince yourself that things will go back to how they were. You believe that disrespect is just a phase. That distance is temporary. The first time I really noticed the shift was when Darren and Leah came over for Christmas 3 years ago. Marjorie had gone through chemo that fall, and her hair had just started growing back. She wore a red scarf and put on her pearl earrings even though she was exhausted. She baked her famous cranberry bars, just like always. Darren arrived 40 minutes late. No call. No apology. Leah walked in first, holding her phone up like she was live streaming. She looked around our house and muttered, "It smells like old books in here." Marjorie smiled anyway, offered her a plate. Leah barely touched the food. Darren said nothing. He sat at the table, scrolling through his phone between bites. When I tried to make conversation, he kept replying with one-word answers. Fine. Busy. Yeah. After they left, Marjorie sat on the couch in silence for a long time. He used to bring me drawings, she whispered. He'd make cards that said, "Best mom ever." I told her he was just stressed. Work, city life, you know how it is. But even as I said it, my chest ached with something I didn't want to name. From then on, the visits got shorter. Sparser. He started calling less. When he did, it was usually about bills, or updates on mom's condition. Always clinical, like he was filing a report. Never just to talk. Then came the paperwork. It started as a casual conversation. Darren said he wanted to help manage things. In case something happens, he said. It's good to be prepared. I was reluctant, but he made it sound like it would ease the burden. He promised it was temporary. Just signatures on a few forms, a power of attorney, access to a shared account. Nothing serious. Marjorie was still sharp, though tired, and she raised an eyebrow. "You're sure about this?" she asked me privately. I shrugged. "He's our son." She didn't push. But I saw the worry in her eyes. After that, things shifted quickly. Darren stopped asking. He started telling. Telling us when he'd come over. Telling me which bills he'd already paid. Telling Marjorie which supplements weren't necessary anymore. Leah started calling herself our healthcare coordinator when she introduced herself to neighbors at the pharmacy. Once, I caught Leah walking through our hallway with a notepad. She was writing down appliance models and wall measurements. I asked her what she was doing, and she smiled, too sweetly. "Just helping Darren get a sense of what might need updating down the line," she said. "Updating? This isn't a project," I said, sharper than I intended. "This is our home." She blinked at me, fake innocent. Of course. I didn't mean anything by it. That was the beginning of the isolation. I didn't feel like a father anymore. I felt like a tenant. One night, Darren brought over documents he wanted us to review. Said he'd streamlined some of the financials. I looked them over. There were accounts listed I didn't recognize, expenses I hadn't approved. He waved it off, said he was just trying to consolidate everything. Marjorie leaned over and whispered, "Did you ask him to do this?" I hadn't. I told Darren we'd need some time to review. He seemed irritated. "I'm just trying to make your lives easier," he snapped. "You both act like I'm the enemy." "No one said that," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "We're just being careful." He sighed. "I have a life, you know. A job. I'm not just here to babysit a spreadsheet." That night, Marjorie cried herself to sleep. Still, I did nothing. I wanted to believe it was stress. Leah. The pressure of adult life. I told myself that under all that anger, he was still our boy. But the visits kept getting colder. On her last birthday, Marjorie asked Darren to bring her the lavender lotion she liked. He forgot. Didn't apologize. Leah rolled her eyes and said, "Maybe next year." Next year never came. A month later, Marjorie slipped into the hospital for the last time. Darren didn't come until the second day. Said he had meetings. Leah didn't come at all. When Marjorie asked for him that night, I said, "He'll come tomorrow." She closed her eyes and said, "Don't lie to me, John." She knew. And deep down, so did I. I started noticing little things. Darren had moved some files from the study. Said he was digitizing everything for safety. My tools were rearranged in the garage. Leah said they needed space to store a few boxes. A few turned into a dozen. And one day, when I went to the bank, the teller said my name was no longer on the joint account. I didn't confront them. Not yet. But something inside me had begun to shift too. The sadness was turning into something else. Resolve. I began keeping notes. Quietly. Dates, documents, overheard conversations. I started watching, really watching, how Darren looked at the house. Not like a son remembering Christmas mornings. No. He looked at it like square footage. Like profit. Like it was already his. The day of the funeral was gray. Not rainy, not stormy, just still and dull, like the sky itself had run out of words. I wore my only black suit, the one I'd used at my father's funeral decades ago. Still fit, more or less. Marjorie had always liked it. She used to say it made me look proper, but gentle. She ironed it for me the night before her sister's service once. Funny how memories come in fragments when you're grieving, not big things, but the quiet ones. Like the way she'd always tug my collar straight before we left the house. There was no one to do that now. I stood beside her casket, eyes on the small photo frame we'd placed near the flowers. It was the two of us on our porch, years ago. Darren had taken the picture, back when he still laughed. Back when he called her Mama and begged her for second helpings of casserole. I stared at that photo like it might reach up and speak to me. People filed in slowly. Old neighbors. A few of her former co-workers. Some didn't know what to say. Others hugged me and whispered how strong I was. I wasn't strong. I was just empty. Darren arrived late, again. Wearing sunglasses, indoors. Leah had a designer bag and a coffee in hand, like she was stopping by before brunch. She nodded toward the casket like it was a museum exhibit. Darren hugged me, half-hearted, quick, and said, "You holding up okay, Dad?" like he was checking off a box. I didn't answer. During the service, he didn't cry. He barely looked at the photo slideshow I'd spent hours piecing together from old albums. He fiddled with his phone. Once, I caught Leah whispering to him. He shook his head and muttered something back. I didn't think much of it at the time. Grief affects people differently, right? But now I know. After the ceremony, people mingled in the church hall. Darren said he needed to take a call. He stepped outside with Leah. I watched them through the window. She was smiling. Laughing. He was talking to a man in a blue suit I didn't recognize. They shook hands. I assumed it was work. Later that night, back home, I sat in Marjorie's chair with the guest book on my lap. I'd read every message, every name. Tried to find comfort in kind words. I left the porch light on for Darren, thinking maybe he'd stop by. Maybe we'd talk. Maybe he'd sit in the kitchen and remember her laugh. He didn't come. The next morning, just after 9 a.m., there was a knock on the door. I opened it to a man in his 30s, neatly dressed, holding a thick folder and a coffee cup. He smiled like this was just another Monday. Mr. Hallberg, he asked. Yes? I'm Greg Miller. I purchased this property yesterday afternoon. Your son handled everything. Said the place was in transition, but I'd be able to take possession by next week. Just wanted to introduce myself and confirm the walkthrough time. I stared at him. I'm sorry. I said, blinking. He hesitated. Your son, Darren Hallberg? He signed the documents yesterday. Said you were moving into a care facility. I assumed you were already aware. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat tightened. My heart thudded in my chest. I stepped back, letting the screen door close between us. You bought this house? I finally said, my voice small. Yes, sir. Full price. No contingencies. Quick sale. Your son said it was urgent due to health reasons. Health reasons. He sold our home the day we buried her. The man, Greg, shifted awkwardly, clearly realizing something was wrong. If you'd like, I can give you the agent's number. Please go, I said quietly. He opened his mouth to speak again but stopped. Nodded. Walked back to his car. I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs too weak to hold me. The hallway spun. I looked around the house, the photos, the curtains Marjorie had sewn herself, the porch chair with her blanket still draped over it. Gone. He'd sold it all. Without a word. While I was still saying goodbye to her. While I stood at her grave, he was handing over deeds and shaking hands. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. An hour passed. Maybe 2. I don't know. Eventually, I walked into the study. The filing cabinet was unlocked. I pulled out the folder where we kept the deed, the old wills, the financial records. Some papers were missing. Others were out of order. My name wasn't on certain documents anymore, at least, not clearly. There was a fresh notary stamp I didn't recognize. The signature looked like mine. But it wasn't. I never signed anything like this. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just betrayal. This was fraud. And everyone else? The neighbors, the church folks, even the guests at the funeral, none of them said a word. Someone had to have seen Darren talking to the agent. Someone had to have heard whispers. But no one warned me. No one said a damn thing. Their silence was a second betrayal. I sat in that house, surrounded by Marjorie scent, and realized I was alone in every way that mattered. No wife. No son. No voice. But something inside me didn't break. It turned cold. And that was the moment I stopped grieving, and started watching. The house was silent the next day. Not the peaceful kind, not the stillness that comes with comfort, but the hollow, sickening quiet of something lost. It was the kind of silence that presses on your chest like a weight, that fills the corners of every room with shadows. I spent the morning going through drawers, cabinets, files, trying to piece together what had happened. What I had signed. What I hadn't. What he'd taken. It wasn't just the sale. Darren had been preparing for this. I just hadn't seen it. I pulled out Marjorie's old wooden box, the one she kept her private papers in, hidden behind the books on the top shelf. She never told Darren about it. It held our original house deed, our first joint will, insurance documents, and old letters from the bank. The kind of things you keep tucked away not for secrecy, but for safety. But when I opened it, I saw immediately, it had been touched. Her envelopes were stacked wrong, some half open. One even had a coffee stain. Marjorie would have never allowed that. My hands trembled as I dug through. The power of attorney form we'd signed last year, I remembered it. It was for medical decisions, and only temporary. Darren had insisted. I'd reluctantly agreed, thinking it might make doctor visits easier. But next to it now was a second copy, identical formatting, newer date, but this one had boxes checked I didn't recognize. Permanent access. Financial authority. Signature lines. And the signature was mine. But it wasn't. It looked like mine, the same curl on the J, the slightly shaky H. But I hadn't signed that page. I was sure of it. Beneath it, I found a typed document labeled, Asset Transfer Timeline. It was a draft, with notes scribbled in Leah's handwriting. I'd recognize that arrogant cursive anywhere. It listed the property, our savings account, vehicle title, and even a breakdown of the home's estimated liquidation value. I couldn't breathe. They weren't just waiting for Marjorie to pass. They were planning what to do after I was gone. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window. Her rose bushes were still blooming. She'd insisted we plant them again last spring, even when she could barely walk. Said she wanted them to greet us every time we came home. Darren used to help her water them when he was little. He'd sing to them, pretending each flower was a person. This one's Mama Rose, he'd say. She's the boss. I felt sick. A knock at the door startled me. It was Mary, one of Marjorie's oldest friends. She held a Tupperware of stew and gave me a soft smile. Thought you might not be eating, she said. I let her in. We sat in silence for a few minutes before she finally spoke. John. I wasn't going to say anything. It didn't feel like my place. But I saw Darren talking to that realtor a week before the funeral. I looked at her, stunned. They were at the cafe. Leah was there too. I only caught part of it, something about off-market pricing and acting fast while the paperwork's clean. I assumed, well, I didn't want to assume the worst. I nodded slowly. You should have told me. I know. I'm sorry. I just didn't want to make things harder. I thought, maybe you knew. I didn't. After she left, I sat in the study for hours, reading and rereading every document, every note. I found text messages printed from an old phone Darren had left here once. In one, he told Leah, once she's gone, I can convince him to sign anything. He's not sharp anymore. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just hollow. And then I found the letter. Tucked inside one of Marjorie's gardening books, I found a folded piece of paper. It was addressed to me. In her handwriting. John. If you're reading this, then something has happened I feared but couldn't stop. I know Darren's heart has changed. I know he's not the boy we raised, at least not anymore. But you must remember this, the house is not just walls. It's our years. Our laughter. Our love. Don't let him sell your memory of us. And don't let him steal what you built. You still have choices. Even if it feels like you don't. All my love, always. Marjorie. I pressed the letter to my chest and wept. She knew. All along, she knew. And suddenly, something shifted inside me. A quiet, slow-burning fire lit in my chest. Grief turned into resolve. I wasn't just an old man, confused and disposable. I was still her husband. And that meant something. So I did what Darren never expected. I started watching. I took photos of every altered document. I began recording my phone calls. I started writing things down, names, dates, conversations, anything that could prove what they'd done. I even installed a little voice recorder under the hallway table where Darren always tossed his keys. He liked to talk on speakerphone. I figured one day, he might slip. He did. But that part comes later. For now, I had one job: gather everything. And remember who I was before all this, before they tried to turn me into a burden. I was a father. A husband. A builder. And builders don't just fall apart. They rebuild. Speech balloon: have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. The next Sunday, Darren called and asked if he could swing by to check on things. Not me, not how are you holding up, Dad, just things. Like the house was a rental property and I was the tenant refusing to leave. I said yes. I wanted to see his face. He arrived alone. No Leah this time. Just Darren, with his sleek black car and his cold, polished smile. He stepped inside like he still owned the place, like he wasn't walking through the remains of my life with Marjorie. I noticed he didn't even glance at her picture on the mantel. You're looking well, he said, scanning the living room. How's the blood pressure? I didn't answer. I pointed to the kitchen. Sit. He raised an eyebrow, like I'd just told a joke he didn't get, but followed anyway. Sat at the table where Marjorie used to fold laundry and hum gospel songs on Sundays. Where he used to color with crayons while I paid bills. I sat across from him, placed the fake signed power of attorney document on the table between us. What's this? I asked. He looked down, then shrugged. Paperwork. From months ago. I didn't sign this. Yes, you did. No, Darren, I didn't. And this signature, I tapped the page. Isn't mine. He chuckled, too loudly. Come on, Dad. Are we really doing this? You probably don't remember. You were overwhelmed with Mom's care. I handled everything for you. No, I said, calmly. You handled everything behind me. And you sold this house. His smile faltered for a second. Then he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms. I had to. It was the responsible thing to do. You're living in a 5-bedroom house by yourself. Do you have any idea how inefficient that is? The taxes? The upkeep? It's absurd. It's my home, Darren. I built it. I lived in it with your mother. We raised you here. And now you're alone, he said, tone sharp. Look, I get it. You're attached. But you're not thinking long-term. I already found you a wonderful assisted living facility. They've got a shuttle, community activities. It's dignified. I stared at him. My jaw tightened. Do you hear yourself? I asked. I'm being realistic, he said. It's called growing up, Dad. Managing assets. Planning futures. Your mother's body wasn't even cold, I said, my voice steady, and you were already drawing up contracts. He stood abruptly, pacing now, hands waving. You're being emotional. I'm being human, I snapped. He turned to me, his face harder now. You should be thanking me. I'm cleaning up the mess you left behind. That's when I realized, he believed what he was saying. Somewhere along the way, he'd rewritten the story in his head. He wasn't betraying me, he was saving me. From myself. From sentimentality. From age. From inconvenience. I stood too. Get out. He stared at me. You heard me. Get out of this house. It's not yours anymore, he said coldly. You just haven't accepted it yet. I didn't respond. Just walked to the door and held it open. He left without another word. That night, I sat outside on the porch with Marjorie's old blanket over my knees. The air was heavy with honeysuckle and dust. I watched the stars come out, one by one, and thought about all the times Darren had sat beside me here. As a kid. As a teenager. Even in college, before Leah, before the shift. He used to say, the stars always look bigger here. I closed my eyes. Tried to remember his voice before it turned cold. Later that week, George from next door came by. He was one of the few neighbors who hadn't stopped talking to me after the sale news broke. Brought a six-pack and sat on the porch with me. Don't take this the wrong way, he said after a long silence, but, you okay? No, I replied honestly. He nodded. Good. That's a better answer than, I'm fine. We sat in silence for a bit. I've seen Leah snooping around, he said finally. Few weeks ago, when you were at the pharmacy. She was out back, measuring the fence line with some guy in a blazer. Had a clipboard. I didn't say anything, but my jaw clenched. George continued. I confronted her. She said they were just getting estimates for potential renovations. Said it like you weren't even part of the picture. I thanked him. He hesitated. John, do you need help? Legal help? I got a cousin who. I've got someone, I said. An old friend of Marjorie's. He smiled. Good. Just know, you're not crazy. You're not old and confused. You're just being taken advantage of. And you don't have to take it. His words stayed with me long after he left. That night, I pulled out a notebook. Wrote everything down, dates, quotes, names. I started making phone calls. I reached out to Marjorie's old lawyer, not the one Darren had tried to use, but the one we trusted back when we drafted our first will. We met that Friday. I brought every document, every forged signature, every audio file I'd quietly recorded. I even brought the timeline Leah had scribbled on. Her handwriting was distinctive, looped and arrogant. The lawyer, Evelyn, looked through it all in silence. After an hour, she closed the folder. This isn't just unethical, she said. It's criminal. I nodded. I want to revise the will, I said. Effective immediately. She studied me for a moment, as if measuring whether I meant it. Then she nodded too. All right. Let's do this. And just like that, the gears of justice began to turn. Evelyn's office was small and tucked into the back of a modest brick building just off Main Street. No fancy fountain pens or modern minimalist decor. Just bookshelves, a few certificates on the wall, and a kettle of peppermint tea she brewed herself. Marjorie used to bring her muffins from time to time, back when they volunteered together at the local food pantry. It's good to see you again, John, she said softly, setting the tea in front of me. Though I wish it were under better circumstances. I nodded. My hands were steady, but inside, everything felt like it was cracking, not from weakness, but from weight. Decades of trust, of loyalty, of giving more than I should have, were finally pressing down. I was tired. Not just from age, but from betrayal. Evelyn opened a fresh folder and clicked her pen. Tell me exactly what you want to do. I inhaled slowly. I want to change the will. Immediately. Darren is to be removed entirely. No inheritance. No access. Nothing. She didn't react, didn't blink or flinch. Just waited, letting the silence do its work. I'm not doing this out of revenge, I continued. I'm doing this because I finally see him for what he is. And I won't, leave Marjorie's memory in his hands. She nodded. Do you want to reassign the property and assets to someone else? I want the house protected, I said. Forever, if possible. If he tries to contest the will, I want everything, the house, the savings, everything, to go to charity. No loopholes. No payouts. Nothing he can worm his way into. She looked impressed, even a little proud. I can draft a no-contest clause. Very strict. If he even files an objection, the entire estate transfers automatically. Good, I said. That's what Marjorie would have wanted. She told me once she didn't care who lived in the house, as long as it was someone who respected it. I want to make sure someone like that gets the chance. Understood, Evelyn said. Over the next hour, we went through every detail, assets, titles, bank accounts. I handed over the files, copies of the forged documents, even a flash drive with Darren's voice admitting things he thought I hadn't heard. When we finished, she slid the papers toward me. Are you ready? I stared at the dotted line. My name was written there, same as it always had been. But this time, signing felt different. I wasn't just leaving behind a legacy. I was drawing a line. I picked up the pen, signed slowly, carefully, and handed it back. Evelyn smiled gently. It's done. I exhaled, and for a moment, I felt light, like something had been lifted from my chest. Not joy. Not yet. But peace. The kind that comes when you stop waiting for someone to change, and finally choose yourself instead. She poured me another cup of tea and asked, what happens next? I don't know yet, I said truthfully. But for the first time in a long while. I don't feel powerless. I stood and shook her hand. Thank you, Evelyn. Anytime, she said. And John, if he comes after you, I'll be ready. Back home, the house felt different. Still quiet. Still filled with shadows. But something about it had shifted, like I'd pulled up a floorboard and let in fresh air. I went room to room, touching the walls with my fingertips. Not saying goodbye. Just remembering. The worn spot on the staircase where Marjorie used to pause and catch her breath. The scuff on the kitchen tile from Darren's tricycle. The scratch on the bedroom door from the time we tried to adopt a dog. These things meant something. Not in dollars. Not in square footage. But in soul. I opened Marjorie's closet, still filled with her cardigans and scarves. I pulled out the lavender one she wore every spring and held it against my chest. We did good, I whispered. Even if he forgot, we did good. That night, I took out the notebook where I'd been recording everything. I wrote a single sentence across the top of a new page. He doesn't own me. And he never will again. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail from Evelyn's office, a certified copy of the updated will, stamped and sealed. I tucked it into the safe under the stairs and made 2 more copies. One I locked in my bank deposit box. The other I gave to George next door, who agreed to hold it in case anything happened to me. You sure you don't want to leave anything to Darren? George asked as he flipped through the pages. I left him enough, I said. He just didn't recognize it. He looked at me and nodded. Fair. That weekend, Darren called. Left a message. Said he wanted to check in. Said Leah was looking at real estate options, and they were thinking of making an official move-in timeline for the house. As if it was inevitable. As if I was just a stubborn placeholder. I didn't call back. Instead, I took a walk around the block. Watched kids play with sidewalk chalk. Watched a young couple trim their hedges together. Life was still happening, even as mine had been flipped inside out. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost walking through it. The wind picked up, and I could almost hear Marjorie in it, that soft hum she always carried, that quiet resilience that held our family together. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. Because the next time Darren tried to push me out of the house, he wouldn't be walking into a victim's silence. He'd be walking into consequences. It happened the following Thursday. The envelope was thick and official, cream-colored with a gold-embossed letterhead that practically screamed arrogance. It was hand-delivered by a courier who didn't say a word, just asked me to sign a receipt. I did. Calmly. Then sat at the kitchen table and opened it with a steak knife. Inside was a formal notice of occupancy termination. Effective within 7 days of receipt, it said. Based on the completed property sale and new ownership documentation. At the bottom, Darren's name was printed in bold, next to a signature that looked too practiced to be sincere. And below that, Leah's. There it was. In ink and arrogance. My son was evicting me. From the house I built. The one where I carried Marjorie across the threshold. The one where I patched the roof in freezing rain and sanded the nursery floor by hand. The one that held every memory I had left. He didn't call. Didn't come in person. Just a document. Just business. I stared at the page, expressionless. My tea went cold beside me. Outside, the wind stirred the porch chimes Marjorie had hung back in '94. They never rang right since she passed. Always sounded like they were slightly out of tune. I folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. Then I stood, walked to the filing cabinet in the study, and pulled out the certified copy of the new will. I placed them side by side on the table, my future and his. One spoke of betrayal. The other, justice. I didn't sleep much that night. My body was tired, but my mind was wide awake, 1,000 thoughts running like freight trains in the dark. I kept seeing his face. That smug little smile he wore when he thought he'd outsmarted me. The way he always talked over me now, like I was just background noise to his ambition. And then I saw Marjorie's face. Her last day. The way she looked at me when she said, "Don't lie to me, John." As if she knew I was still hoping for a son who no longer existed. I'd made a promise to her. And now it was time to keep it. The next morning, I called Evelyn. "I got the notice," I said. She didn't need clarification. "You ready?" "I've never been readier." "Do you want to handle this quietly or?" "No," I said firmly. "Not quietly. I want him to know. I want everyone to know. Because for too long, I kept this family's ugliness behind closed doors. Out of shame. Out of fear. And now? Now, I've got nothing left to lose." I spent the next 3 days preparing. I dug out every photo, every voice memo, every document with altered signatures. Evelyn helped me notarize the originals and made copies to be distributed if necessary. George offered to act as a witness. He'd overheard enough over the months to testify to Leah's interference and Darren's behavior. But more than that, I prepared emotionally. I walked the house again. Every room. Touched the walls. Whispered to Marjorie as if she were still here. "I won't let him take you from this place," I said aloud in the bedroom, staring at her framed embroidery on the dresser. "He already took everything else. But not this." I even ironed my best shirt. The one she used to like. Said it made my shoulders look strong. Not that Darren would notice. Saturday night, I got a message from Darren. "Leah and I are hosting a small dinner Sunday. Just close friends and family. Come if you want. Or don't. We'll be announcing some good news." There was no apology. No mention of the eviction notice. Just another performance. Another attempt to parade success while sweeping everything else under the rug. I didn't reply. But I did lay out my papers, printed my statement, and packed a small folder in a weathered briefcase I hadn't used since I retired. Sunday evening, I shaved. Buttoned my shirt. Wore the watch Marjorie gave me on our 40th anniversary. And I walked across town. Their rented home, a modern box with wide windows and cold light, was buzzing with chatter. Laughter. Glasses clinking. I stepped inside without knocking. Everything stopped. Darren was in the middle of a toast, holding Leah's hand. They both turned, stunned. "Dad," he said, blinking. "You came?" I didn't speak. Not yet. I walked to the center of the room. Guests looked at one another. Whispers began. Someone said, "Is that his father?" Another muttered, "I thought he moved out." I opened my briefcase. Took out the eviction notice and held it up. "Some of you may know," I began, voice steady, "that this young man, my only son, sent me this letter 4 days ago. An eviction notice. From the home I built. The one where his mother died. He did it behind my back, while I was grieving." Gasps. Leah's face went pale. "But what he didn't know," I continued, now holding up the second document, "is that I updated my will. Removed him from it entirely. Every dollar. Every piece of property. If he contests, it all goes to charity in my late wife's name. And there's already a lawyer waiting." The room was silent. "I have recordings," I added. "Documents. Witnesses. If any of you doubt me, I'll be happy to provide copies." Darren looked furious now. Embarrassed. "Dad, this isn't the time." "No," I interrupted. "You don't get to decide the time anymore." I looked around. "Some of you may still believe Darren is a good man. That's your choice. But now you know who he is to me. Not a son. Not a caretaker. Just another man who tried to sell something he didn't build." I closed the briefcase and walked out. No one followed. And I didn't look back. That I didn't walk home that night. I wandered. Down the cracked sidewalk past the bakery Marjorie used to love. Past the bench where we sat the day she told me her diagnosis. I let the weight of what I'd done settle in my chest, not as guilt, but as a strange sort of freedom. Heavy, but earned. The next morning, my phone didn't ring. No text. No apology. No attempt at explanation. I expected as much. By mid-afternoon, though, the calls started, not from Darren, but from people who'd been at the dinner. 2 of Leah's friends. 1 of Darren's old college buddies. They reached out with clipped voices and uncomfortable silences. One asked, "Was it really all true?" Another said, "I had no idea he'd go that far." I didn't offer comfort. Just told them, "It's done now." By the end of the week, it was all over town. This place isn't big, gossip moves faster than wind. Especially when it involves money, family, and someone like Darren. The story morphed with each retelling. Some said I'd disinherited him at the funeral. Others claimed I'd kicked him out of the house with a shotgun. None of that was true, but I didn't correct them. Because what was true, at the heart of it, was even more damning. He tried to erase me. Quietly. Legally. With paperwork and politeness. And I said no. That Friday, he showed up. Unannounced. I heard his car pull up before I saw him, that too sleek black thing that didn't belong on our gravel driveway. He sat in it for a long while. Maybe working up the nerve. Maybe rehearsing lines. I stayed seated on the porch, mug in hand, pretending not to notice. Eventually, he got out. He didn't come up the steps. Just stood near the edge of the lawn, hands in his pockets, eyes low. Dad. I didn't reply. I didn't expect you to go public with all that. Still, I said nothing. He shifted uncomfortably. You made me look like a monster. You didn't need my help with that. He flinched. I was just trying to secure things. For the future. No, I said, finally looking up. You were trying to take them. You thought I'd be too tired, too sad, too old to fight. But you forgot who raised you. You forgot who built this house, with my hands, Darren. Not a contractor. Not a checkbook. My hands. He opened his mouth. Closed it. I stood slowly. Walked to the edge of the porch. Your mother used to say this house had a soul. I didn't understand that until now. She wasn't just talking about memories. She meant integrity. Walls that stood for something. This place meant something. I know, he said softly. No, I snapped. You don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't have sold it while her body was still warm. He looked away. I didn't think it would matter, he said after a long pause. I thought you'd be relieved. Relieved? I scoffed. To be discarded like old furniture? To be pushed into a facility so you could remodel my kitchen? That's not fair, he mumbled. Neither was forging my name, I shot back. That silenced him. I updated my will, Darren. You're not in it. And if you try to fight it, everything goes to charity, in her name, not yours. And believe me, I have everything documented. He looked like he wanted to argue, but didn't have the words. After a moment, he said, Leah's gone. I raised an eyebrow. She left after the dinner. Said I humiliated her. Said she didn't sign up for this kind of scandal. Sounds like she signed up for a payout, I said. He didn't deny it. I don't know what to do now, he muttered, almost to himself. I stepped down the porch, walked right past him, and opened the mailbox. There's nothing for you here anymore, Darren, I said calmly. Not in this house. Not in my plans. Not in my memories. He looked up, eyes wet but proud. So that's it? We're just done. We were done the day you sold what wasn't yours. After he left, I felt something inside me finally give way. Not sadness. Not anger. Relief. I stood alone in the garden, knees aching, the late summer air pressing against my skin, and realized I hadn't felt this grounded in months. Maybe years. The house behind me wasn't just a building anymore. It was mine again. Ours again. Marjorie's laughter still echoed in the breeze. And Darren's silence no longer felt like a wound. It felt like peace. Speech balloon. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The phone didn't ring for 2 weeks after that. No texts. No knocks at the door. No sudden visits from Darren or Leah or anyone connected to either of them. It was like the house had been wrapped in an invisible veil, untouched, unspoken of, quietly avoided. I didn't mind. The silence, after everything, was not unwelcome. In fact, it was the first true silence I'd had in a long time, not the cold, empty kind that followed Marjorie's death, but the clean kind. The kind that lets you hear yourself think again. And I had a lot to think about. The first thing I noticed was how different the house felt without Darren's shadow looming over it. I moved freely. Sat in any chair I pleased. Walked through each room without wondering what he might do to it next. I opened all the windows, let the air sweep through like a blessing. I even pulled down the curtains Leah once insulted, the ones Marjorie had sewn by hand. They were old. A little faded. But they were hers. I washed them gently, ironed them slow, and hung them back up with pride. I made a pot roast, Marjorie's recipe, and ate it over 2 days. Took out her old china just because. Played her favorite record and left the player spinning into the night, even after I'd gone to bed. I stopped walking on eggshells in my own home. But outside these walls, the world had caught wind of what happened. It started at the post office. The young woman behind the counter, Eliza, handed me my letters with a tight smile. "I heard about the family situation," she said gently. "Hope you're doing okay." "I am," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Thank you." Then came the hardware store. George had been spreading the truth, not the dramatized gossip, but the real story. And slowly, it reached the ears of old friends, churchgoers, people who'd once called Darren such a bright young man. Their tones changed. Their eyes softened. Some came right out and said it, "I'm sorry." Others simply nodded with a kind of shame in their faces, like they hadn't known what he'd become. A few offered help. One couple, Marjorie's friends from the gardening club, asked if I'd thought about selling to a preservation group. Said the house should be protected. I smiled, politely declined. It's not for sale. Not anymore. Not ever again. The loneliness came in waves, of course. Grief doesn't leave just because justice arrives. Some nights, I'd walk into the bedroom and forget for a split second that Marjorie wasn't there. I'd reach for her side of the blanket. I'd hear a creak and think it was her coming up the stairs. Then reality would settle in again, not painfully, but with that familiar quiet ache. But somehow, it felt easier now. Like her memory had space to breathe again. Like my grief wasn't being trampled by legal threats or Darren's schemes. It was just mine again. Honest. Personal. And healing. One morning, I found a small brown envelope on the porch. No stamp, just tucked under the doormat. Inside was a card, handwritten. "Mr. Hallberg. I know we've never spoken, but I wanted to say thank you. What you did took courage. My own father is going through something similar, and you gave me the strength to speak up. If you ever need help around the house, I'm just down the street, the blue one with the lemon tree. Clara." It was the first time I'd cried in weeks. Not out of pain. But because for the first time, I realized I wasn't entirely alone. A few days later, an old friend of mine stopped by, Bill, a Navy buddy I hadn't seen in almost 10 years. He'd heard about the fallout, said George filled him in. We sat on the porch, sipping iced tea, talking about war, women, and regret. The usual things men like us eventually circle back to. At one point, he asked, "What are you gonna do with the place now?" I didn't have an answer. Not then. But the question lingered. The house had been saved, yes. The legacy protected. But what now? I didn't want it to sit here, growing older with me. Gathering dust and memories like moths. Marjorie had always wanted this place to be full of life. Even near the end, she said, maybe one day it'll be a home again. For someone who needs it. Those words kept echoing. A seed was planted. I started walking every morning, the same loop Marjorie and I used to take. Past the schoolyard. Through the park. Past the church and back. People waved. Some stopped to chat. Others simply nodded with respect. Each day, the walks got longer. One morning, I saw Clara, the girl with the lemon tree. She was helping an elderly man into a car. He looked frail but smiled at her like she was his whole world. That image stayed with me. And I thought, maybe there's something I can still do. Maybe this house, our house, still has one more life to give. I went home, sat at the kitchen table, and opened a new notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote, Marjorie's house, what it could be. Then I started listing ideas. A place for veterans. A boarding house for seniors. A shelter for women and children starting over. A living museum. A community garden. I didn't know yet which path I'd choose. But I knew this much. Darren had tried to erase everything this house stood for. And now, I would rebuild it into something even he couldn't touch. It started with one phone call. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one Darren used to eat cereal at, legs swinging under the chair, and stared at the list I'd written the night before. Marjorie's house, what it could be. Her name, in my handwriting, steadied me. I dialed the number slowly. It had been years, but I remembered it by heart. St. Andrew's Community Office, came a warm voice. This is Lydia. Lydia, I said, voice a little rough. It's John Hallberg. Marjorie's husband. There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. John, my goodness. How are you? I'm finding my footing, I said honestly. And I think I've got an idea. A big one. Lydia was one of Marjorie's oldest volunteer friends. They ran a church soup kitchen together for nearly a decade. Kind, firm, and not easily impressed. But by the end of our call, she was nearly in tears. A boarding house for veterans, she repeated. In her name? I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. It's what she would have wanted. A home full of stories. Of dignity. And you'd live there too? I'd manage it. Oversee the garden. Cook when I can. Nothing fancy, just real people in need of a start. There was a long pause. I think it's beautiful, John. And I know exactly who you need to talk to next. The next week moved fast. Lydia connected me to a city outreach coordinator, then a local nonprofit director who specialized in transitional housing. I met with both of them, one at the house, one over lunch at a diner where Marjorie and I used to split pie. They both said the same thing, it's doable. And it matters. Paperwork started the next day. Zoning forms, licensing applications, insurance adjustments. Evelyn helped navigate the legal hoops. I had to revise the will again, not to undo Darren's exile, but to protect the house as a nonprofit trust under Marjorie's name. That part was hard. Emotional. But good. Each signature felt like stitching something torn. Physically, I had work to do. The house needed fresh paint. The guest rooms had to be cleaned and cleared. Leah had left behind half a dozen boxes of nonsense, novelty wine glasses, fake plants, decorative pillows still in plastic. I donated what I could. Tossed the rest. I opened every window in the house. Let the air in. Played Marjorie's records while I scrubbed the walls and floors. Sometimes I talked to her as I worked. I'm doing it, love, I'd say, wiping down her old sewing desk. We're making something new. One afternoon, while sweeping the attic, I found an old box of Darren's childhood things. Action figures. Crayon drawings. A third-place science fair ribbon. I didn't cry. Just sat beside it and wondered how we'd gotten so far from that boy. Then I sealed the box, labeled it simply, before. The first volunteer who came to help was Clara. She showed up with lemonade, gloves, and a notepad full of ideas. I used to intern at a senior center, she said, grinning. I know how to organize schedules, and I'm a decent cook. She wasn't just decent. She was brilliant. She brought her grandfather by the next day, the same man I'd seen her helping into a car weeks earlier. He was quiet, polite, and his hands trembled a little. But when he saw the garden, his whole face lit up. Your wife did all this? He asked. She started it, I replied. I'm just trying to keep it alive. He patted my shoulder. You're doing more than that. Soon, others trickled in. A retired school teacher who wanted to feel useful again. A widowed plumber who offered to fix the pipes for free. A pair of young veterans, both recently homeless, who said they just needed somewhere quiet to sleep for a while. I gave them keys that same day. They helped me carry old furniture out of storage, cleaned the garage, trimmed the hedges. We didn't talk much, but when we did, it mattered. They weren't looking for handouts. They were looking for respect. And that's what this house had started to offer. The front room, once cold and empty, began to feel warm again. Not because of the temperature, but because of the voices. The smell of food. The weight of stories being shared over coffee. One evening, we lit a fire in the backyard pit and sat in a circle. Someone brought out a guitar. Someone else passed around a loaf of banana bread with a note card on top that read, "In memory of Marjorie." I didn't say anything. Just smiled. Looked up at the stars. And felt, for the first time in a long while, that she was right there with us. That night, I stood at the edge of the garden, hands in my pockets, and whispered, "We're not done." Not by a long shot. Because this house, the one Darren tried to sell out from under me, was now more than just a house again. It was a home. Not just for me. But for anyone who needed one. They started calling it Marjorie's house, without me asking. One of the veterans, Luis, painted a little wooden sign and hung it on the front porch. Hand-carved letters, a soft sunflower border. Figured she deserved a nameplate, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Homes like this don't just happen. I couldn't speak for a moment. Just nodded and shook his hand. The letters weren't perfect. Neither was the paint. But it felt right. Like something she would have smiled at and touched gently with her fingertips. And so the name stuck. We weren't a big group, but we were steady. 5 residents now lived here full-time. All of them over 60. Most of them alone. Some veterans, some just forgotten by the world, the kinds of people society gently sweeps to the margins. But here, they laughed. Cooked. Played cards. Took turns watering the garden. One even fixed the back step that had creaked since '92. Without asking. Just saw it needed doing and did it. They didn't gossip about Darren. Didn't ask about Leah. They didn't care what had happened before. All that mattered was the warmth of the rooms, the clean sheets, the porch swing that finally worked without groaning. And the fact that every morning, someone made coffee for someone else. It was strange, and strangely healing, to see people living in this house again. Not visiting. Living. I'd walk down the hall and hear soft music playing from one room, the hum of someone shaving in the bathroom, and the quiet murmur of morning conversation in the kitchen. And none of it felt invasive. It felt like the house was stretching awake. One of the boarders, Ruth, had been a school librarian for 30 years. She started organizing the bookshelves in the study, without asking. When I peeked in one day, she looked up with a sheepish grin. "Hope you don't mind," she said. Some of these were out of order, and well. I don't sleep much these days. I didn't mind. I hadn't touched those shelves since Marjorie passed. Every Friday night, we did potluck dinners. Simple food. Folding chairs. Mismatched plates. Someone always brought a pie. There was no TV, no phones at the table. Just voices. Real voices. Sometimes we shared stories. Sometimes we just sat in the comfort of not needing to fill the silence. That's what real family feels like, I think, the space to simply be. No performances. No expectations. Just presence. Then, one morning, I opened the door and found a young woman standing on the porch. She looked nervous. Brown eyes, maybe 22. A denim jacket too big for her shoulders. "Mr. Hallberg?" she asked. "Yes?" She hesitated. "I'm Natalie. I'm Darren's daughter." The words hit like a soft punch. I hadn't seen her since she was a toddler, Darren's first child, from a marriage that ended before it ever began. Her mother had moved across the country. Darren never spoke of her, never made an effort. And yet, here she was. "I heard what happened," she said. "Not from him. From someone at the church. I needed to see for myself." I invited her in. She stepped inside slowly, eyes wide, like she was walking into a place from a photo album. Her fingers brushed the doorframe, the banister, the edges of the kitchen table. "I remember this chair," she said suddenly. "I think I spilled juice on it once." I smiled. "Still has the stain." She looked at me then, really looked, and her voice softened. "I'm sorry. For what he did. For not being here." "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "I know," she whispered. "But I still feel sorry." We sat on the porch for an hour. Talked about her life. Her job. Her studies. How she found out through a friend who sent her a clip from the town newsletter. "I didn't know you were still here," she said. "Didn't know this house still was here." "It's more than just here," I replied. "It's alive again." She asked if she could come back sometime. Help in the garden. Maybe visit on Fridays. I said yes. Of course I said yes. Because sometimes, the only part of family worth keeping is the part that chooses you back. In the weeks that followed, Natalie became a regular. She helped Ruth catalog the books. Took over grocery runs when my knees started aching. Once, she brought a friend from school to paint the pantry shelves. She didn't ask for anything. Didn't carry her father's guilt like baggage. She just showed up. Like family should. One afternoon, as we sat peeling apples for a pie, she asked quietly, "Do you ever miss him?" I paused, hands working the paring knife slowly. "I miss who he used to be," I said. "The boy who built a treehouse with me. The teenager who used to bring his mother flowers after class. I miss that version. But the man he became, no. I don't miss him." She nodded. "That's fair." And then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, she reached across the table and held my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. "For choosing peace. Most people just let it fester." I didn't respond. Just let the warmth of her hand steady mine. That night, I looked around the dinner table. Ruth was telling a story about a mischievous student who used to hide bookmarks. Luis was humming a hymn under his breath while carving roast chicken. Clara was laughing with Natalie, teasing her about something she'd burned last week. And me? I was watching. Quiet. Content. Because blood may tie us, but it doesn't bind us. Loyalty does. Kindness does. Presence does. These mismatched people who chose each other, this was real family. And for the first time since Marjorie left this world, I felt something I thought I'd never feel again. Home. It was nearly dusk when I heard the knock. Soft. Hesitant. Like whoever stood on the other side of the door wasn't sure they should be there at all. I was in the kitchen, drying dishes from dinner. Clara had just left, and the house smelled faintly of garlic and lemon. The others were in their rooms, settling in for the night. The knock came again, this time a little firmer. I walked to the door slowly, towel still in hand. When I opened it, I wasn't surprised. Darren stood there. He looked older than I remembered. Not physically, but worn, like someone had rubbed the shine off him. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes tired. He didn't have a suitcase, a folder, or Leah by his side. Just his hands in his pockets and a faint tremble in his voice. "Hey, Dad." I didn't answer right away. I studied his face. The jaw that used to look like mine. The eyes that once sparkled when he built Lego towers with me on the floor of this very house. Now, they looked lost. I was in town, he said. Figured I'd stop by. I stepped aside, silently. He entered like a man stepping into a memory, careful, reverent, like the floor might crack beneath him. His eyes scanned the living room, the photos on the walls, the bookshelf Ruth had organized. Then the sign Louise carved, Marjorie's house. He paused in front of it, jaw tightening. I heard, he said finally. About what you did. The boarding house. The trust. Everything. I nodded. It's impressive, he said quietly. Marjorie would have liked it. He looked down at the floor, then slowly sank into the armchair by the window, Marjorie's chair. For a long while, we sat in silence. Just the wind outside. The tick of the kitchen clock. I lost everything, he said suddenly. Leah's gone. The job dried up. Investors pulled out after the dinner, and after the papers hit the town site. I didn't move. He looked at me. I know you don't want to hear that. I'm not asking for pity. I needed to say it out loud. Still, I stayed quiet. I was wrong, he said after another pause. About the house. About Mom. About you. That got my attention. He swallowed. I convinced myself I was protecting your legacy by monetizing it. But the truth is, I was scared. Of aging. Of losing control. Of ending up like you, before I realized how strong you really were. I finally spoke. You didn't just sell a house, Darren. You sold your mother's memory. You used my grief as a bargaining chip. And you assumed I'd be too broken to fight back. He winced, but didn't deny it. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. Good, I replied. He nodded. Looked down. I just needed to see it for myself. What you built. It wasn't just me, I said. It was your mother's spirit. It was the people who walked through that door and saw more than square footage. They saw safety. Belonging. Family. He looked around again. It feels like her in here. Even now. I nodded. Then, gently, I stood. Walk with me. He followed me out onto the porch. The sun had dipped low, painting the yard in gold and soft orange. The roses Marjorie planted were still in bloom. The same ones Darren used to water when he was little. You remember those? I asked. He nodded. I named them after cartoon characters. You called that one Mama Rose. I smiled faintly. Said she was the boss. He chuckled. The first honest sound I'd heard from him in years. She was the boss, he said. We stood there in silence for a long moment. I can't change what I did, he said finally. And I don't expect to be part of this, whatever this is now. You're not, I said. He nodded, accepting it. But, I added, if you want to visit someday, not as an heir, not as a son expecting anything, but as someone who wants to sit, to help, to just be, the door isn't locked. He looked at me, eyes wide. You'd let me back in? No, I said. I'd let you visit. There's a difference. He didn't argue. Didn't ask for more. Didn't beg. He just nodded. And for once, I believed he understood. He turned to leave, paused on the step. One last thing, he said. What made you fight back? What changed? I looked at the house, the porch swing, the windows still glowing with warmth from inside. I stopped being afraid of losing you, I said. And started being afraid of losing her. Her values. Her voice. Her love. He nodded again. And then he walked away. This time, I didn't watch him go. I sat on the porch until the stars came out. Ruth brought me a blanket. Louise handed me a cup of tea. Natalie curled up on the swing beside me, phone tucked away, just quiet and steady. And I thought, sometimes, closure doesn't come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from standing firm. From speaking softly, but not bending. From choosing the version of love that doesn't demand to be blood, only earned. Speech balloon, would you have accepted his apology? Tell us what you think in the comments. The ribbon was yellow. Marjorie's favorite color. Natalie had picked it, tied it around the gatepost herself, hands shaking just a little. Clara printed the flyers. Louise trimmed the bushes. Ruth baked 5 pies. And someone, I still don't know who, made a stack of laminated, welcome home signs and stuck them around the garden. We didn't call it a grand opening. That felt too flashy, too formal. We just called it what it was. Marjorie's house, a place to begin again. And people came. Not just the boarders or volunteers, but neighbors. Old friends. Folks I hadn't seen since Marjorie's funeral. The pastor from St. Andrew's spoke briefly. George raised a glass of lemonade and toasted to good roots, and even better blooms. Someone cried. So did I. But it wasn't sadness. It was relief. Gratitude. That deep, soul-level warmth you feel when you know, truly know, you've done the right thing. The ceremony was simple. We cut the ribbon. Opened the doors. Let people wander through the rooms that had been polished and painted with care. The garden path had been cleared. The front porch gleamed with fresh stain. Inside, the walls held photos of Marjorie, smiling, gardening, laughing in her apron. No photos of Darren. Not out of spite. Out of truth. This house was no longer about what we'd lost. It was about what we'd saved. A woman approached me near the end. Middle-aged, eyes kind. I was your wife's patient once, she said softly. Back when I had no one. She used to bring me extra blankets from the hospital linen closet. Told me, just because life's been cold to you doesn't mean you don't deserve warmth. I swallowed hard. She saved my life, the woman added. And now, you're doing the same, for people like me. She hugged me. I hugged her back. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the stars were out, I sat on the porch alone. Except I wasn't really alone. The house was quiet, but not still. I could hear Ruth humming while cleaning the pie tins. Louise was laughing softly with one of the new residents, a man named Ed who hadn't smiled in weeks. The porch light flickered once, that old wiring again, and I chuckled to myself. Something Marjorie always nagged me to fix. I looked out at the yard and saw the shadows of the rose bushes dancing in the wind. Mama Rose, I whispered. And for a moment, I felt her beside me. Not just as memory. As presence. I pulled out the old notebook where I'd first scribbled ideas. The cover was worn now, the pages wrinkled with fingerprints and time. On the last page, I wrote. She wanted a home filled with life. I gave her one filled with heart. Then I closed the book and placed it on the table by the door, beside a bowl of fresh lemons Natalie brought from Clara's tree. Full circle. People ask me now if I miss my son. I don't lie. I say I miss who he used to be. The boy who giggled in the bathtub. The teenager who hugged me tight after his first heartbreak. The man who stood beside me when Marjorie beat cancer the first time. But I don't miss who he became. And that's okay. Because grief and love are allowed to coexist. You can mourn what was while still choosing joy in what is. That's what Marjorie taught me. That's what this house now teaches everyone who walks through its door. We've got plans now. Bigger ones. Natalie wants to start weekend workshops, cooking classes, book clubs, maybe even storytelling nights where residents can share their histories. Clara's organizing a grant to expand the back of the house, maybe build a small greenhouse, a space for therapy or art. I told her she had my full blessing, and that if she broke a window, I'd just charge her double for repairs. She laughed. Rolled her eyes. Called me Boss Grandpa. I pretended to hate it. But it warmed me more than she knows. Sometimes, I still hear Darren's voice in my dreams. Not the man's voice, the boy's. And sometimes I wake up aching. Wondering if he'll ever come back. Not for money. Not to ask for a piece of the house. Just, to sit. To listen. To remember who he was before ambition swallowed him. But if he never does, I'll still be okay. Because this messy, mismatched, loving place, is my family now. The ones who show up. Who stay. Who plant things knowing they may never see them bloom. The real ones. The last thing I do every night is check the garden. It's routine now. I stand by the porch rail. Watch the moonlight fall over the roses. Listen to the wind in the leaves. Then I whisper the same thing, night after night. We did it, Marjorie. They tried to take it, but we took it back. And now, it's yours again. And maybe it's just the wind. Maybe it's just the quiet. But sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I hear her say back. I never left.